First of all, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really happy to get to talk a little bit about the crazy stuff we do at Nubank. And well, so my name is Rafael Lisboa. Most people just call me Lisboa because Rafael is a very common name in Brazil. I've been at Nubank for the last decade. And lately, I've been in the mobile platform team as a software engineer. So, and I want to talk a little bit about what we do with feature flags and experimentation, first releases in a Flutter app. I will be using the term feature flags and experimentation. I'm gonna talk as if it's the same thing because nowadays we take it as if it's the same thing. I know it's not conceptually the same thing. So as we go over this talk, just think maybe it should be the same thing always, okay? So mistakes on a mobile app are expensive, especially if you're dealing with people's money, and they get very sad when they cannot use their money. But how can we make them cheap, right? The trick here is to get them when they're small. And then what I want to focus on for this presentation is what is the moment in which we were operating is our Flutter migration, right? We started adopting Flutter in 2018 before Add-to-App existed. And as a result, native was very comfortable in our architecture. And that's okay. We never rewrote our application. That was something we never wanted to go through because it would be a lot of work and we wouldn't be able to keep up with the business pace. So we took it little by little, slice by slice, elephant carpaccio. But at some point, we got to a stage in which, okay, we got a lot of features in Flutter. Now let's migrate the core. And how do we do this while the airplane is up high, right? How do we change the engine? And so we had very good tooling for experiments already. We could do rollouts, A/B tests, all of that using the customer ID as a key. But when we're talking about how do I flip the HTTP client implementation, how do I flip the storage implementation, how do I flip if this data is coming from native or from Flutter itself, we cannot rely on that because maybe the person is not even logged in yet, right? And also, when we are removing something from native and bringing it to Flutter, we need those two values to be synchronized. We want to turn off native and enable Flutter. So if a flag is false in native, it needs to be false. And if it needs to be, it needs to be false in Flutter as well. So they need to look at the same value, right? Otherwise, you'll get inconsistent behavior. Let me just go over our stack really quick. At the right there, we have the experimentation platform, which is a platform that I love, and all Nubank employees use it a lot. It's where they configure the experiments, right? So there we can say, this flag is enabled for this percentage of customers. This flag is enabled for people who have the minimum version of the app, blah. This is enabled for segments. We can do a lot of stuff in there. We can base it on a data set that we compute every night. It's really, really powerful, right? And at the bottom, we have the other services, which is the backend services. And that was already working well, right? Experimentation in the app experience, because we use server-driven UI a lot, that was already covered. So if I wanted to release a new product for a percentage of customers, I could already do that really well. And then the kind of new thing, although this was done years ago already, was that we created a service that is very specific around providing experiment for our mobile, for the core of our mobile application. And it's used only for platform features. And then we have a control in there that you can only add a feature flag to be exposed in that service up there if mobile platform agrees, right? Governance. And then at the left, we have the Nubank app, which uses this configuration. So it decides which variant to show, which path to follow, and which components implementation to use. And this was lovely. So let me talk a little bit about things, random things in this stack, right? The first thing we thought about when the app remote configuration service started being created is that I don't want to wake up at 2 a.m. to fix stuff because my feature flag service is down. So this was built anti-fragile from the beginning. The app still works if the app remote configuration service is down, right? It can be, we tested, like we removed it from the load balancer and test that the app still opens when it's down. All types of being down, like not responding, not DNS failing, all of that stuff. And app remote configuration service should be able to compute experiments really fast. So we want this, I think today our response time for this is 5 milliseconds, like the time it takes us to compute the response. And this is like no I/O. You cannot hit a service to compute the value of an experiment. You need to have the data beforehand and do the computation as pure as possible, right? What else? In the app, this is a thing that we also played a little bit, and it was very interesting that we created an app configuration flag to change when the app configuration is loaded. And where we landed today, this hasn't always been like that, but today, the flags are loaded in the background, and they only change after the next app open. Before, we used to load, like the first thing the app did was to load the app config in a very, like it didn't use anything else from the infrastructure. It had its own HTTP client so that it could be as isolated as possible in our architecture and then be the decision maker for everything else that was happening in the app, right? And it was always atomically saved to the storage so that we don't have the case of native and Flutter having different values because you did the request, but then you updated native after you updated Flutter or vice versa, right? And about the experimentation platform, I would say activation logs are important. So like when we are doing an experiment and not just a feature flag, we want to know when were people exposed to that new experience. And so thinking about in the code, when we send the activation logs is also very valuable because then we can make sure that the person saw that experience that we are validating. And then we can use that to monitor it, right? So that we can have like a small sample size, expose a small number of people, maybe expose only the Nubank employees, for example, and see how are the metrics comparing against people who are not exposed to that experience. So activation logs are important and expensive, so sample them. And we usually, when we do experiments, we have 3 variants, right? So we have control, treatment, which are the ones that will be generating activation logs, and rollout, which is like the people who will be getting the new experience, but we don't care about their activation logs. And then with this, we can see, like we can not break our bank and not break our bank. Thanks for laughing, guys. You're great. And another cool thing, just to mention a little bit of AI here, right, is that we added an MCP an in-house MCP that can access the experiment's change history. And then when we ask AI, hey guys, hey dear AI, can you help me figure out what is this error that started happening here? It can map this against experiment changes that happened recently, and then it can use this as an extra research data, right? So it can say, hey, I think this is related to this experiment here that was enabled in this timestamp that matches when this error started happening, right? So how we use this, I think this is a thing that evolved over time a lot in the mobile platform team as we did this migration. First thing, and this is the most important thing, everything goes behind a flag. There is no excuse not to add a feature flag to whatever change you're making. Oh, but it's in native. You can add a feature flag. Oh, but it's in Flutter. You can add a feature flag. Oh, but it's in the main.dart. You can add a feature flag there, right? And over time, in our very complicated business of operating in multiple countries, multiple products, different entry points, different like marketing campaigns, chaos all the time, right? The peace of mind of like just being able to go back to the team that is saying, oh, I'm having this problem. Maybe it's related to your experiment. We don't need to stay until late debugging that. We can just say, okay, just turn off the experiments and see if the problem goes away, right? And this is really worth the extra code branches that we get. Second thing, we relentlessly measure the impact of what we ship. So every time we do a feature flag, we should have a question that we want to answer. In our environment, is this thing breaking the app or not? But it can also be, and this is like a lovely thing that we have done, it can also be, what is the business impact of making these improvements to the core of the application? And third, safety is an infinite platform feature. We're never safe enough. And every time we have an incident, we do a post-mortem, and we always do something different, right? And this do something different, the best thing you can do is to make it a platform feature, so that it's not like a process that somebody has to read the document and follow. It's like built in the platform, and there's no other way for you to do anything that doesn't involve following that process, right? So we learn from our mistakes and we fix them in software and not with bureaucracy. And another thing, default values are mandatory. That's why, like, if the app config request fails, we always have a fallback. So I know that if a really old version of the app is pointing to an experiment that we already removed, it's fine. There's always a default value there, and the app is going to work. We can be sure of that and have that like extra peace of mind, right? So takeaways, I would say, first thing, own your data. I think it's very easy nowadays to deliver a critical part of your data to a third party, and then there you don't have as much access to do a SQL query and match this to that, to this data set, to that data set, so that you can be like, okay, people who are on the new storage implementation are actually giving X dollars more money to us. So being able to put a price tag in an infrastructure improvement, not just for that one experience, for that one experiment, but for the future experiments to come, in which people maybe don't have so much good data. But if you're able to say, if I cut X milliseconds from the funnel, I get this much more money at the end of the month. This is forever, right? You will always know, okay, so this kind of customer, this kind of environment, this country, this is the impact I get from optimizing things in the core. And that's really important if we want to have a strong, durable platform team that doesn't get deprioritized over more like immediate business demands, right? It's always being able to show the value of your work. That's super important, especially when you are in a very technical environment. And of course, we wouldn't be able to do this if the data was spread in different places, and then it's hard to pick up, and then you cannot have a good sample size, and then you're able to provide a statistically significant explanation that is the impact. I know this. I compared control to treatment, right? Another point, curate guardrail data sets. This helps layers talk to each other. The same experimentation platform is also used by product teams who are releasing things in their flows or maybe in the homepage, and then being able to say this experiment is actually harming the app initialization time by X%, right? We don't need to go there and be policing them all the time, because the platform, when they look at the data, the experiment results, they will see that guardrail is not being met, right? Same with app stability, a lot of things, and then we can catch this early before this affects a significant part of our business. And also vice versa, right? So that we as a platform team can be sure that we're not selling less investments because of a new HTTP client or something like that, right? And also you incentivize what you automate. So old feature flags, we all love them, right? We want them to go away. And that should be easy. It should be easy to say goodbye to an experiment that we already finished. So I really like when we created the finish experiment button in our platform, that it goes and opens a pull request using an agent with the winning variant that you defined. And then from there you can review the code, you can make further changes. But this became something more common the more easy we made it, right? And also feature flags themselves, when we made it easy to use them in the app, they became more used, right? So when you think about a platform team, it's good to incentivize the things we want to see, so make them easy. If it's really hard, people are just not gonna do it as much as we want. Okay, folks, that was it. Thanks for having me, and I'm happy to chat, and yeah, happy to answer any other questions that you may have later.